Happy Friday, y'all. I hope you are all doing so great. We have made it to the end of the week. Congratulations. My name is Idara Ekpoh. I am going to be your host today, and I have been your host all week for this week's segment of Pro Tips. Welcome back to Adobe Live. I hope you all are having a wonderful Friday, and I really hope that you guys have enjoyed everything that we've covered up until this point. We have talked about so much. We talked about color profiles. We talked about HSL sliders. We talked about the color grading wheels. We really have covered so much throughout this week. And today we're going to continue that journey, sadly coming to an end, but we're going to cover a little bit about the tone curve today and how I like to utilize it in my workflow. And then we might also, if we have time, kind of combine everything together that we've learned and show how everything can kind of work together to really enhance your photo from, where it may have been in the beginning and really giving it that vibrant color grading, vibrant edit at the end. So really excited. We're going to go ahead and get started. I have this lovely set of this portrait here from the set of images. We've kind of jumped around in this whole set of images throughout the week, if you guys have noticed. But there's a number of different kind of setups we use, different types of poses, etc. So I figured it would still be a good example for us to utilize today. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the tone curve. And with that, I really want to kind of talk a little bit about what the tone curve is, and how it can essentially be utilized. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of background. For me, this is probably the scariest portion of my Lightroom. When I think about how I can add it to my workflow, when I look at it, I'm just like, what is that? I don't want to use it. So I usually would just skip over it. But very recently, I kind of told myself I want to utilize it more, understand it, and see how it can really impact my images. So we're going to talk through this today and really talk about the impact of the tone curve. But to do so, I just have this kind of gradient here for y'all to kind of talk a little bit about and show what the tone curve is going to do to specific aspects of your image, right? So we have this gradient here, and in this gradient, you essentially have like on the far left, and I probably should have labeled it, so I do apologize. But on the far left, you have your darks, which is your shadows. In the middle, where it's kind of grayish, it's the grayish to kind of transferring into that white. Those are your midtones, and then your whites are your highlights, right? And so when you're looking at the tone curve, you're really looking at ways that you can add contrast, highlights to your image, and even is also looking at how you can add colors. You'll see here that we have our RGB channels where you have the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. So we can talk a little bit about what those are going to do to our images when it comes to adding color or adding contrast to or adding your highlights to your midtones, highlights, and shadows, right? So we're going to start with just showing y'all this. I think this is called the parameter curve. If I hover over, it'll tell me. Or maybe it won't tell me. Okay, this is one of the curves. I don't remember. Okay, parametric curve. Okay, I knew it was para something. But with this curve, you'll notice that you have like a little histogram in the back here. We haven't done, which is kind of mimicking what's up here. You will notice that when we go into other images, and just to cover this real quickly, usually I would go and do some basic editing, and then whatever histogram down here would kind of be a snapshot of whatever edits I would make up here. So I'm not going to go too deep into that because I don't generally pay attention to it. I just, again, do a lot of my editing by eye. But you'll notice here that you have your shadows down here towards the bottom of the curve. You move up, you have your darks, you have your lights, and then up here you have your highlights. On either end of the curve, at the very top, you'll realize that this will kind of be, this side is like your pure whites, and down here is like your pure blacks. So for example, if I were to click on the very top of the curve, and if I were going to drag, that's not what I want. I need to click on it properly. Actually, you know what? I can do this better with the point curve. So to show y'all this real quickly, if I wanted to drag down the top of this curve and bring it down, as I'm coming down, you realize that it is adding blacks to my highlights. And as you can also notice with the rest of the curve, it's adding blacks to my highlights and my midtones and make it a completely black image, right? Or I can kind of decide where I want this range to fall. Down here, you have your darks, your shadows, And as you are bringing it up, you're realizing that you are adding all black everything. You're realizing that you are adding whites to every aspect of your photo. And now we have a pure white there. So those are like the drastic impacts there. Now, if you look at the middle, which is essentially our midtones, I'm going to go ahead and click right here in the middle, make a point where it intersects. And if it decrease, I'm adding blacks into my midtones. I kind of make it more contrasty there, or I can bring it up and add whites to my midtones. So you can see that center portion that was more so gray is looking more white now, or I can bring it down and it's looking more black. So you can really play around with the, to kind of get an understanding of what does that look like with the point curve and where is it going to impact your photo. So that's just to give you an understanding there. With this curve, you can't necessarily come in here. This one is a little bit more restrictive, where here you have more freedom to decide what points you want to make and where you can go. But here you can make slight edits to see, okay, this is, again, if I come to this middle point and if I'm dragging down, it's kind of impacting my midtones, a little bit of my highlights as I'm coming down more, or I can come down here to my shadows and do the same thing. Increase to add lighter tones into my shadows, or decrease to continue to add those darks in there. So that is one kind of understanding there. When you also talk about this tone curve, and I'll show this on an actual image, oftentimes people talk about utilizing the S curve to kind of be a solid foundation for how you can utilize this specific tool in Lightroom. And the S curve is essentially just making one dot, and I'm doing this on the actual, I'm not doing it on this first tone and this first curve. I'm doing it on the point curve now, because on the point curve, you have a little bit more freedom, like I mentioned before, to adjust this graph any way that you see fit, right? So I'm going to go ahead and make a point right here, which is going to be kind of my shadows. In the shadows area, I'm going to make a middle point where the lines intersect. If you zoom in really close, you'll see that there is like a grid here. So where these lines intersect in the middle is your midtones of your photo. And then up here at top, I'm going to, where these two lines intersect, kind of fall, or actually might do this. I'll fall more into the, up here. And then if you just double click, I believe the line goes away. I'm gonna bring this down a little bit more into that actual lower grid, upper right hand grid for the highlights, and then lower left hand grid for the shadows. So you can make an S curve, which essentially you're going to be bringing up your highlights a little bit and bringing down your shadows. And that is usually kind of like a standard curve that I've seen a lot of photographers start off with and then make adjustments where it seems fit. So if you find it easier to start up here as a foundation, you can then start to build upon it and see what that looks like. So that is what the point curve, this first point curve, is doing for us. You're noticing, again, it's just adding more highlights to your image or more shadows, depending on where you're focused on the specific curve. Now, let's say you want to add a little bit of color, right? You have these three separate channels here. You have your red channel, your green, and your blue. And you'll notice here with each of these points that there are colors that they are opposite of each other, right? So here I have my red, and opposite of your red is like your cyans. Here, green, opposite of green is that magenta purple, and blue, opposite of blue is kind of like that yellow greenish color. So this is really great because if you have a photo that has too much red in it, you can reduce the reds in the photo to add a little bit more cyans to kind of balance it out, and vice versa. So if I'm going to want to go ahead and let's say I want to make a point curve, I'm going to make that dot there for my shadows, the dot here in the middle for my midtones, and the dot here on top for my highlights. If I wanted to add some green into my highlights, I can bring this down. And as you can see, it's adding more green into the highlights portion. And even if I wanted to take this point off and just show y'all dramatically, this is adding green to my highlights, just my highlights, because I have that point there in the middle that's kind of trying to keep my midtones, but you can see it's slightly adjusting that as well. Or if I wanted to come on the drastic end and add reds into my shadows, I could do that. I could also you have the freedom to really go wherever you would like. You can do the same thing with these curves. Whatever way that you're pulling, it's going to be adding the opposite color. So if I'm pulling away from the green, I'm adding now purple, magenta into my highlights, or excuse me, my highlights, that's midtones. I'll go here in the middle, so just really focus on the midtones. You can see here that I'm adding this kind of magenta color there. I can add green, And then I can do add or subtract green or purple in my highlights and in my shadows as well. And you can do the same thing with this curve here. So that's just a quick overlook of what the point curve can be utilized for. So I'm going to go ahead and reset all these channels, and I'm going to go to a actual photo, and we can talk a little bit about what this can look like on an image. All right, I think I flagged one that I wanted to focus on. Right here. Okay, perfect. I have this portrait here. Really, really love it. I think it's really fun. It's cute. Very, very simple. I do see a question in here. I want to make sure I'm not missing them. First one was, do you normally approach the curves with the regular shape you make, or is it photo to photo? Usually that S curve shape. Oh, I was 30 seconds before you, LOL. Do you generally use this feature as a correction tool or as a style tool? I generally use it as a correction tool. I use it for correction of exposure in my image and how much contrast I want in it. Or sometimes I'll use it for skin. If I feel like someone's skin is showing up too yellow, too orange, or whatever else, I can kind of utilize those RGB channels to kind of add the opposite color to see if I can balance it out. So that's usually what I will utilize it for. You can kind of get into, depending on how much you do, it can become a little bit stylistic. Because again, you're adding, once you get into those color channels, you are adding colors into your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights. So I have this portrait here. I'm just going to go ahead and start to combine some of the things we've talked about earlier this week. I'm going to come down here to browse and click on my neutral set here, because I think I prefer that to my other channel color profiles. Yes, I'm going to start with that. I'm going to increase my exposure just a wee bit. Bring up my contrast, shadows, blacks, just a little bit like that. We'll do that to start. And so let's say if I wanted to start with this first curve, I could, and the other great thing as well, if the curve scares you too much on this first one, you do have sliders here, which can be easier to use. And if you wanted to increase your range in a specific way, you do have these three kind of sliders down here. Down here in the left-hand corner, this is representing your shadows and your darks. If you pull this to the right, you're now increasing the range of the darks. If you pull this down, you're now decreasing the range. And what do I mean by that? If I increase it up here, you realize it's impacting the shadows. There's more range for me to kind of edit there. If I decrease it, it's a lot less of a range. So you can let me kind of reset this back to where it was. You can kind of pick what that range looks like if you find that beneficial. Usually I don't adjust this. Sometimes I'll just start here with these sliders just for easiness. So I'll just kind of see what it looks like and what I like. And then I'm going to go into this curve here and see if I want to kind of play around a little bit more. So I'm going to make my 3 dots, one for my shadows, one in the middle for my midtones, and one up here. I always try to get the dot as perfect as I can, and then one up here for my highlights. Like I mentioned before, I like to start a little bit with the S curve in case I find that beneficial. So I'm going to increase my highlights slightly. I'm going to decrease my shadows a little bit. And then let me see if I want to do anything to the midtones. And then you can see that before and after what that does. So it's a little too contrasty for my liking. So I'm going to pull back on those, on adding darks to the shadows. So very slight, but a little bit of a change there. And then I'm going to come into my reds and see what this is my red channel, and see what this is going to do my image. I'm going to create the same S curve and then see if I add a little bit of blue, where is it adding my blue? So you can see the highlights. So their teeth, their clothing, it's adding that blue kind of cyan tone. I don't want to do too much of that, of course, but maybe if I go up, it's adding red. So you can kind of see if you want to do anything there. I'm going to pull this down a little bit to correct the skin. I felt it was a little bit too orange. Do I want to add any reds or blues into my shadows? Maybe just a little bit. Awesome. Another pro tip that I want to mention real quickly is that you do have this little adjust point curve that you can click on, and you can now click on a specific portion of your photo. And this could be also, maybe this is an easier way to kind of move into this tool, this is probably what made me feel more comfortable in the beginning, is I would take this point curve and let's say I wanted to go to a dark area of my photo where the shadows are really present. I could click and then drag. If I'm dragging down, and let me reset this curve so you guys can really see it. Okay, I'm going to take the point curve. I'm going to come here to my shadows. And if I drag up, or sorry, I'm moving to the left, it's moving it up and it's adding the red in, or you can kind of just play around it with it that way and kind of have more of a control in that sense. So I'm going to take this point curve. Let's say that's what I need to do. I need to delete this point here. Okay, let me take the point right here and see if I want to add anything into my shadows there. I just, again, clicked on my screen, and then if you move up, it's adding, and if you move down, it's taking away. The other thing I want to make note is if every time you click, it's creating a new point on your S curve. So you want to be mindful of that. I'm going to take this here, or if I wanted to come to maybe like a highlight, it's going to pick a point on the curve, and then it's impacting the highlights in the photo. So you can do that if you find that to be a little bit easier, but sometimes it's just, you can just kind of go straight on the curve itself. Now I'm going to come into my greens. See, I know I have some greens here in the carpet. I don't know why I've been struggling with the word carpet all week. But I can come up here, see if I want to add a little bit of anything, any purples in the image. Not really. At this point, I probably won't do this green and purple. I kind of like where it's at right now. I do want to see if I want to make it warmer anywhere, maybe warmer in my mid-tone area. That's a little too yellow. I'm going to pull back so it's a little bit more neutral there. Let's see what that before and after is. They're very slight, but it's not as kind of greenish as it was before. If I pull this up too for my highlights, and then let's see what looks good to me. Let's do there. Oh, wrong button. Okay, so this is what this before and after looks like so far. So very slight, but it's, somebody asked me, or not somebody, sorry, Ryan, you asked me if I utilize this more for correction or for styling. I usually like to use the tone curve for more so correcting the image and getting it exposed the way that I properly want it, and kind of starting off with the color that I really like. And then from this point, I can start to utilize some of the other adjustment layer, or some of the other tools that we talked about earlier this week. So if I now wanted to come into my HSL sliders, and let's say I wanted to deepen the skin tone, I can reduce the orange a little bit, which I don't really want to do. I feel like both of their skin looks really, really nice. I might increase a little bit to make it a little brighter. I know there's some green present in here. I can take my little pointer and kind of target the green here and see if I want to change the hue of it. Do want it a little brighter. I'm going to come here to the saturation, see if I like that green. Ooh, that's kind of ugly. Maybe like right there. I'm going to come down to the luminance, see if I want to deepen it a bit. Nah, I like it a little bit. And that's, sorry, I said green, but it's more so yellow in the tone there. Let's see. Another question or another comment, their skin looks very healthy. Could it be an acne ad? LOL. They have really, really good skin, and I really would say that they're kind of really blessed to have that. So it could be an acne ad if you wanted it to be. Let's see here. Let's see if I wanted to come into saturation. She's a little orange. Let me see if I can. Don't want to do too much, but just pull back a tad bit. Okay, that looks fine to me. And then if I wanted to come down here into my color grading, I can now start to stylize my image a little bit more. So I'm going to slide down here and see if I want to add into colors into my shadows. And this here, very different from when we were talking about the point curve. You just have a lot more freedom about what the hue of the color is, essentially, opposed to when up here, when you're looking at adding these colors into your highlights, shadows, and midtones, you're only adding the opposite of whatever that primary color is. So that's the difference between the two, and why I would focus on utilizing my color grading wheels for my styling, because I feel like it would be I would enjoy that more. So I'm going to come down here. Let's see. What do I want to add? And like I mentioned yesterday, I think we talked about this yesterday. If it was yesterday, I believe so. And I like to really kind of see where I want to fall upon. Let's see. Let's do like right there. Come over to my midtones. Sometimes I like to add a little bit of yellow there, but I don't like what it's doing to their teeth. So I think I'm going to pull back on the midtones real quickly. And I'm going to come to the highlights. I like to see the drastic ends of shadows and highlights and then see where I fall in between and what's missing. So I'm going to see what I like. I kind of like this more so darker vintage vibe. Am I feeling that? Yeah, right there. With a little bit of that green in the highlights. Not too much because I don't want their teeth to look green. And then I can come here to midtones and see where I fall. Okay, let's see what that looks like. I'm going to come back up to my basics channel up here and see if I want to add anything. If I feel like anything is missing. Pull down the warmth a little bit. Yeah, I like that. Let's see what that before and after looks like. Skin tones are preserved. You really want to make sure that they don't look too orange or too red. I think that is still good. And then if I wanted to create a mask, if I felt like she was a little bit too highlighted, I can create a mask of my subject. We also talked about mask on Tuesday, and it might pick up 2 people. Because they're so close, I think it's detecting that both of them are one person. But I'm just going to see if I can come in here real quickly, create this mask. I am going to subtract her. No, that's not what I want to do. I'm going to subtract. I'm just going to use my brush and subtract her from here as much as I can because I want to only make edits to Nena right now. Okay, that's really fine for now. And then I'm going to come here and then we're going to see if I bring this exposure of her down a little bit. I want to kind of make sure she's still looking really deep in her skin tone as she was before. We'll pull this up. I think that looks a little better. Let me see that before and after. Yeah, she's not as bright there. If I zoom in real quickly for you guys. Let's see if I can. There we go. This is the before and this is the after. So I want her to look a little bit deeper, make sure I'm keeping that skin tone and she's not looking too shiny and bright. Okay, let me zoom back out. Yeah, that's really nice. Beautiful. And then at this point, you just kind of make any slight adjustments in all the different areas that we've talked about to see if anything is feeling off. But that is essentially what my entire workflow would look like. So we talked about the color profiles on Monday and making some adjustments into your basics tab just to get your image properly color corrected. Then today, talking a little bit about going into the tone curve next, seeing how I want to further correct my image when it comes to how much exposure in how much brightness in the highlights or shadows and the midtones, or if I want to do any kind of color correction here with the primary colors. Then going into our HSL sliders to really kind of impact certain colors in the photo and maybe target. And maybe if we want to target a certain color and see if we want to change the hue or saturation or the luminance of it. I like to do this for colors that are very isolated. I mentioned this earlier in the week because if you're focusing on colors like red, orange, and yellow, those tend to really impact the skin. So if I am messing around with red, you can see it slightly impacting their skin. You'll more so probably see it with the orange. So as I increase orange, decrease it, it's impacting their skin because there are red and orange and yellow tones in the skin. So sometimes I'll tend to make slight adjustments with those 3 specific colors, but I don't want to do too much because I don't want them to look too orange, too red, too yellow, etc. So I like to really focus on the green, aqua, blues, purple, magentas for all 3 areas because I feel like those are more so isolated colors. And any changes I'm making there aren't going to be too drastic for my image. For example, I'm making these edits to this blue right now. very slight. It's not impacting anywhere else. And then coming down to our color grading wheels to really kind of tone and style our image a bit more, which we talked about yesterday. So that is the before and after of this image. Again, skin tones are preserved, which is really, really great. And yeah, so you can see, I feel like it's like a slight difference. I didn't want to do too much, but I feel like it's just enough for this photo to kind of keep that vintage fun vibe that I feel like I was going for in the shoot. But yep, that is all that I have for y'all today. I really hope that you enjoyed this live stream and really just enjoyed all the pro tips this week and had found something that you can add to your workflow. If y'all have any questions, comments, concerns, anything that you want to spill out from your heart, I will be live on Discord right after this for 30 minutes. So I really hope to see y'all there. The link, I believe, will be put in the chat as well as it is in the bio of this live stream as well, in case you want to join. So I will see y'all there. Thank you so much.